Thank you for joining the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston for our online worship service. I'm the Reverend Dr. Colin Bossen, Senior Minister. Today in worship, I'm joined by the Reverend D. Scott Cooper, our Assistant Minister, Alma Viscarra, our Membership and Communications Coordinator, Carlos Rodriguez, one of our worship associates, and Mark Vogel, our Music Director. Mark is joined by Traveler, featuring Andy Black, Carol Burris, and Charlie Burris, as well as several singers from First Church, including our outstanding Sanctuary Choir. My sermon today is entitled Marching On. It's a reflection on the music offered to mark the 4th of July. For those of you who are with us for the first time, let me say a few words about Unitarian Universalism. We are a religious tradition that celebrates the possibility of goodness within each human heart, the transformative power of love, and the clarifying force of reason. We believe that we need not think alike to love alike. We hope that you find our worship a source of comfort and clarity, and we invite you to join us each week for as long as we remain primarily online and in person as soon as it is safe to gather again. I invite you now to hear our call to worship.
Sunday has arrived and summer is upon us. Welcome again to this virtual place of community and worship. We gather together again in communion, seeing with our hearts those we cannot see with our eyes. Whether you have joined us many times before or this is your first time, welcome. Welcome to this place of music and the sound of voices. For this hour, reach out to those watching this morning and join hearts, if not hands. Raise your voices in song with them. Welcome, you who long for connection. Come, let us worship together.
Celebremos compartiendo nuestras vidas, encendiendo esta luz.
Now let us sing to the power of the faith. Sing, now let us sing to the power of the faith. Lift up your voice, be not afraid. Now let us sing to the power of the faith within. Now let us sing to the power of the faith. Now let us sing to the power of the faith. Lift up your voice, be not afraid. Sing to the power of the hope within. Now let us sing to the power of the love within. Now let us sing to the power of the love within. Lift up your voice, be not afraid. Sing to the power of the love within. Now let us sing to the power of the joy within. Now let us sing to the power of the joy within. Lift up your voice, be not afraid. Sing to the power of the joy within.
Please join with me in the spirit that some call meditation and others name prayer. Make yourself comfortable, relax. Take one deep breath and then another. Open your mind, open your heart. Today, I share with you a prayer written by Tamara Labach, a UU minister and author. The prayer is entitled, A Prayer for America. God of many names, you who has endowed us with the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Let us remember this day that in this country, there is no national religion. There is no superior race. There is no preferable gender or orientation. We gather holding a common value that the glory of this country rests first and foremost in its diversity. Out of many ideas, out of many beliefs, out of many views, out of many voices, out of many passions, out of many experiences, we are one. Help us, O God, to never forget that we need not be alike to live and love alike. We ask for forgiveness this day for our national and individual transgressions when we have chosen in action or silence in the face of injustice and abuse of power, and our failure to claim our own. We ask for forgiveness for when we have not known our own neighbor, fed our hungry, or equipped our future generation with knowledge and love. We ask for a blessing on this nation according to our own faith and forms, and pledge our voice in support of moving closer and closer to freedom. In the names of those who have come before and those who are yet to be, in the names of all of the helpers of humankind. Amen. We pause now together to lift up that which sits heavy and light on our hearts. We lift up Irv and Jane Smith, celebrating their 60th wedding anniversary, and all those dealing with the stress of this pandemic and those dealing with the actual illness. This is far from over, and we ask you to give us patience, perseverance, and comfort in our mourning. I invite you now to say the name or bring to mind those you wish to be held by the loving embrace of this religious community. They are part of the great cloud of witness and memory. We will, even if we do not know their names, hold them in our hearts. In this great cloud of witness and memory, amid this beloved community, we hear these names and hold them in our hearts. Let us remember the suffering and joy amid and among our community that we do not know. We pause in awe and wonder of the mystery that is life, in the spirit of love, in the spirit of hope, and in the spirit of compassion. I invite each of you to enter into a time of silent prayer, meditation, or reflection.
Over the next 2 weeks, our shared offering will go to sustain local organizations that are working to address police brutality and build power in Houston's Black community. The shared offering will be split between the Texas Organizing Project, an organization that has been coordinating bail funds for Texas protesters, the SHAPE Center, one of Houston's longest-standing community centers, and CIHA Youth and Fitness Center, which provides health and fitness programs. This is a crucial time for movements for justice. We ask that you consider making a generous donation. During our annual Inspiration Sunday, we ask that you consider giving the congregation half of what you would have spent on a vacation. We now ask you that you consider giving the other half during the next 2 weeks of our shared offering. Is it a lot to ask? Yes. Will it make a difference? We certainly hope so. Will whatever you give this morning, whether it's $1 or $1,000, be appreciated? Most definitely. An offering will now be gratefully received.
Hi, my name is Carlos Rodriguez, and today I am reading There Was a Right Side in the Late War by Frederick Douglass. But this war will not consent to be viewed simply as a physical contest. It is not for this that the nation is in solemn procession about the graves of its patriot sons today. It was not a fight between rapacious birds and ferocious beasts, a mere display of brute courage and endurance, but it was a war between men of thought as well as action, and in dead earnest for something beyond the battlefield. It was not even a war of geography or topography or of race. But the sectional character of this war was merely accidental, and its least significant feature, it was a war of ideas, a battle of principles and ideas which united one section and divided the other. A war between the old and new, slavery and freedom, barbarism and civilization, between a government based upon the broadest and grandest declaration of human rights the world ever heard or read, and another pretended government based upon an open, bold, and shocking denial of all rights except the right of the strongest. There was a right side and a wrong side in the late war, which no sentiment ought to cause us to forget. And while today we should have malice toward none and charity toward all, it is no part of our duty to confound right with wrong or loyalty with treason.
Say, brothers, will you meet us? Say, brothers, will you meet us? Say, brothers, will you meet us on Canaan's happy shore? Grace of God will meet you. By the grace of God will meet you. By the grace of God will meet you. Where parting is no more.
This 4th of July weekend, we bring you our service from our Museum District campus in Houston, Texas. Mentioning our location is particularly important today as we are now one of the national epicenters and quite possibly one of the global epicenters of the coronavirus outbreak. The Texas Medical Center hospitals, which are located within walking distance of where I'm preaching, have exceeded their ICU bed capacity. The president of Houston Methodist Hospital recently said, "It's actually possible we could become the next New York City." As I preach the sermon, I'm aware that many of you have friends and family who are sick, and that some of you are sick. The virus is not some abstract thing. It haunts our lives, a terrifying, invisible vector of suffering and mortality that might strike any of us. The situation is as disheartening and exhausting as it is terrifying. I was reminded of this recently when I had to run a couple of routine errands. They were sort of thing that back in February would have been no big deal. A trip to UPS and a visit to a garden store. They required navigating through the spaces I was in while wearing a mask, attempting to social distance, and trying to remember to use hand sanitizer whenever I touched something. I came home exhausted and in need of a nap. If you are like me, you're probably sick of all of this and quite ready for a little celebration and release. That makes the 4th of July holiday all the more difficult. It's typically one of the high points of the summer. Time for fireworks, pool parties, outdoor festivities, music, and parades. I understand that here in Texas, barbecue is often a big part of the activities. None of this, of course, is to be advised. For my own part, my 4th of July is being spent with a quiet evening watching the bright chemical flashes of purple, green, pink, and red, white, and blue from afar after participating for a little while in our vigil for Black Lives Matter. I anticipate that your holiday activities are similarly sedate. That brings me to the service. Some months ago, we decided that since the holiday was going to be abnormal, we would do something a little bit different and more celebratory for worship. Normally, the 4th of July is a real low point in church attendance. Most of the staff are on vacation, and we're lucky if we have half of our congregation here. We figured that given the complexities and disappointment that many people are feeling, it would be a good opportunity to do a special musical service. Mark, the choir, and our regular guest musicians, special thanks here to Traveler, have really been knocking it out of the park lately. With such a fine musical director and such a fine music program, we thought, why not mark the holiday with song? Back in April, I suggested that we build the service around the Battle Hymn of the Republic. It's a song that in many ways tells the history of this country, especially once its variations and elisions are taken into account. As John Stauffer and Benjamin Sokas write in their book on the Battle Hymn, it has celebrated the sense of mission and national exception that has bound many of the people of this country together in times of trial, and it has highlighted and even deepened the fractures running through those ideas. I chose the Battle Hymn as our central musical piece over the Star-Spangled Banner intentionally. The Star-Spangled Banner is a slaveholder's song. It was written by the slaveholder Francis Scott Key. He was an opponent to the abolition of slavery and believed that black people should not be citizens of the United States. The Star-Spangled Banner has been somewhat sanitized of his views. Typically, people sing the 2 or 3 of the 4 verses that Keyes wrote. The verse that is almost never sung, the original 3rd verse, is filled with anti-black, pro-slavery words that denigrate free blacks who had escaped from slavery to fight on the British side of the War of 1812. The California chapter of the NAACP has called for it to be removed from the national anthem, and I have to say I agree with them. The Battle Hymn of the Republic has a more complicated history. It has often functioned as a secondary national anthem. It was sung at Barack Obama's inauguration, George W. Bush had it performed in the church service at the Washington National Cathedral following the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center and Pentagon. While it has been deployed for imperialist purposes and it is rife with Christian apocalyptic images, it is not a slaveholder's song. It was written by Julia Ward Howe, a Unitarian abolitionist who sought to encourage Union troops during the Civil War. Howe wrote her song in 1861 and published it early in the next year. She set her words to the tune John Brown's Body, a piece we will hear shortly. John Brown's Body itself used the music from the hymn, sometimes called Grace Reviving in the Soul, and other times known simply as Say Brothers. Some years later, in the early 20th century, the same music provided the tune for Solidarity Forever, which itself might be thought of as an anthem for the labor movement in the United States. Charlie Burris offered us a beautiful version of the hymn's refrain as meditation music before the sermon. It's a straightforward piece of Christian hymnody. It's the sort of thing that would have been sung about 200 years ago at the big outdoor revivals known as camp meetings. Like its musical descendants, Say Brothers is filled with short, repetitive lines that are easy to memorize. And like all three of its progenies, it offers a salvation narrative. Say, brothers, will you meet us on happy Canaan's shore? By the grace of God we'll meet you, where parting is no more. It's very straightforward, a simple testimony to the conventional Christian afterlife, an eternity of bliss facilitated by the divine in Canaan, a euphemism for the promised land of heaven. Within that euphemism, we encounter one of the challenges of the salvation narratives that populate Say Brothers and its offspring. It's a salvation narrative that includes some people and leaves others out. The God of Say Brothers is a partial God, only providing grace to those converted to Christianity. More troubling is Canaan itself as a metaphor. In the Hebrew Bible, Canaan is the promised land. In Genesis, it is given to Abraham and his descendants by God as part of their covenant. As part of this covenant, God grants Abraham dominion over the people who already lived in Canaan, the Canaanites. When Christian Europeans arrived in this hemisphere, they brought this story with them. The indigenous scholar Steve Newcomb describes its subsequent impact. Borrowing from the story, the English colonizers portrayed North America as England's Canaan. The English considered themselves to be a people chosen by God for a special commission to colonize the North American Canaan. While Canaan in the song does not appear to reference the continent, its present does point to a troubling elision in all four of the hymns with the same tune. All four provide salvation narratives. None of them include the indigenous nations of this hemisphere in those narratives. This dynamic was on full display on Friday when the president held an event at Mount Rushmore as a 4th of July celebration. Mount Rushmore has been carved into the stone of the Black Hills, land that has historically belonged to the Lakota. Prior to the president's rally, the president of the Oglala Sioux ordered him to cancel it. Mount Rushmore is part of the territory that by two 19th century treaties is supposed to be under control of the Great Sioux Nation. Nick Tilson, a member of the Oglala Sioux, recently described the monument's history this way: stealing our land and then carving the faces of 4 white men who were colonizers, who committed genocide against indigenous peoples, is an egregious act of violence. Against that backdrop, the President of the United States offered a speech attacking those who are dismantling and calling for the removal of monuments to Confederate leaders, Ku Klux Klan members, slaveholders, and white supremacists. Such individuals are part of the fabric of the United States. The much-treasured Declaration of Independence, for instance, lists amongst its complaints about the British Crown that it has put limits on the genocidal actions of the colonists against the indigenous peoples. The country currently appears to be divided over the question of who the heroes of its narrative should be. On one side, there are those who think that the slaveholder and purveyor of genocide, Andrew Jackson, should be replaced on the $20 bill by the liberating hero Harriet Tubman. On the other are those who, in the words of the president, believe our nation is witnessing a merciless campaign to wipe out our history, defame our heroes, erase our values, and indoctrinate our children. It all bespeaks of the legacy of the Civil War. In many ways, it appears to center on the statement raised by the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass: there was a right side and a wrong side in the late war, which no sentiment ought to cause us to forget. If that statement is true, then it is unwise to celebrate Confederate leaders who fought on the wrong side. If it's false, then reconciling ourselves to their celebration should not be an issue. There was a wrong side and a right side in the late war. That brings us to the second version of Say Brothers, sometimes called John Brown's Body, and sometimes just called the John Brown Song. It's exquisitely performed here by the Houston folk trio Traveler, Carol and Charlie Burris and Andy Black.
Old John Brown's body lies mouldering in the grave, while weep the sons of bondage whom he ventured all to save. But though he lost his life while struggling for the slave, his soul is marching on. John Brown was a hero, undaunted, true, and brave, and Kansas knows his valor when he fought her rights to save. Now though the grass grows green above his grave, his soul is marching on. He captured Harper's Ferry with his 19 men so few, and frightened old Virginia till she trembled through and through. They hung him for a traitor, themselves the traitor's crew, but his soul is marching on. John Brown was John the Baptist, of the Christ we are to see, Christ who of the bondman shall the liberator be. And soon throughout the sunny South the slaves shall all be free, for his soul is marching on. Glory, 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 hallelujah. Glory, 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 hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul is marching on.
The conflict that he heralded, he looks from heaven to view on the army of the Union with its flag red, white, and blue. And heaven shall ring with anthems o'er the deed they mean to do, for his soul is marching on. Ye soldiers of freedom, then strike while strike ye may, the death blow of oppression in a better time and way. For the dawn of old John Brown has brightened into day, and his soul is marching on.
John Brown's Body, along with Solidarity Forever, is one of my favorite protest songs. Like Say Brothers, it offers a salvation narrative. And like Say Brothers, the salvation its promises are complicated and not untroubled. John Brown's Body is a hymn of division. It was initially sung by Northern soldiers and abolitionists in an effort to clarify that the Civil War was over the question of slavery. In the first years of the conflict, Abraham Lincoln would have gladly preserved slavery if that would have ended the Civil War and reunified the United States. It was because of this reason that Frederick Douglass, who perhaps could have been described as the late president's friend, said, "We were at times grieved, stunned, and greatly bewildered by him." John Brown's body attempted to intensify the cleavage between white Northerners and white Southerners. It made it clear that if the North won, there would be no union with slaveholders. It proclaimed that the men who fought in the gray uniforms against those who wore the blue were themselves a traitorous crew. And it celebrated John Brown, the militant abolitionist who believed that slavery could only be overcome by violence and who organized the raid on Harper's Ferry. The raid was a touchstone in the events leading to the Civil War. It was an attempt to launch a slave resurrection across the South. When it failed, Brown was captured and executed. He was then alternatively cast as a hero and a villain. Among Northern abolitionists, particularly Unitarians, he was widely celebrated. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote that he made the gallows glorious like the cross. Henry David Thoreau made the same comparison in a speech he delivered shortly before the abolitionist was hung. The version that Traveler sang of the song was the second widely circulating version. The first, often more popular version contained a verse that even further emphasized the tensions between the Union and the Confederacy. It called for the execution of Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy. That version, perhaps not incidentally, often proved to be best loved by African American soldiers within the Union Army. In the first months after the war, they often sang it while marching through the lands of the old Confederacy. It was meant to emphasize, in Douglass's words, that there was a right side and a wrong side to the late war, and that the salvation of the Union would only come when the Confederacy was smashed and slavery was forever destroyed. They sometimes also sang another version that has been omitted from iterations of John Brown bodies. African American soldiers sang, "They will have to pay us wages, the wages of their sin. They'll have to bow their foreheads to their colored kith and kin. They will have to give us house room, or the roof shall tumble in as we go marching on." The words call for reparations for slavery. They acknowledge that the South was often filled with unwilling racial mixing, that blacks and whites were kith and kin. And the verses prophesied that unless free blacks were given what was owed to them because of their generations of unpaid labor, the roof shall tumble in. It is a verse that undoubtedly made many white abolitionists uncomfortable. All of them wanted to get rid of slavery. Most of them did not endorse the idea of a massive transfer of wealth that was in the hands of Southern whites into the hands of freed people. This leads to another troubling aspect of the hymn. It casts a white man, John Brown, as a salvific figure. He might be thought of as almost the original white savior, a figure who rescues people of color from plight and oppression. Frederick Douglass tried to talk him out of the raid on Harper's Ferry, and it seems that Brown certainly viewed himself as something of a messianic figure. The song turns him into John the Baptist, with Abraham Lincoln the implied Christ. The efforts of African Americans on the Union side during the Civil War, efforts which proved crucial to the preservation of the Union and the defeat of the Confederacy, go unacknowledged. Like Say Brother, John Brown's body encapsulates much of the injustice and division of the United States. While Say Brother evokes the metaphors used by the English colonists to justify genocide against the indigenous nations, the sung verses and missing verses of John Brown's body suggest why the country continues to divide along the fault lines of the Civil War. Confederate leaders like Jefferson Davis only faced marginal punishment for their treason after their war. Formerly enslaved people did not receive reparations, and people who believe themselves to be white still often find it difficult to acknowledge the contributions or take leadership from people of color. Let's now listen to Solidarity Forever, the final version of the hymn.
Solidarity forever, solidarity forever, solidarity forever,
Yet what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? But the union makes us strong.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. Is there aught we hold in common with the greedy parasite who would lash us into serfdom and would crush us with his might? Is there anything left to us but to organize and fight? For the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong.
It is we who plowed the prairies, built the cities where they trade, dug the mines and built the workshops, endless miles of railroad made. Now we stand outcast and starving midst the wonders we have made, but the union makes us strong.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong.
All the world that's owned by idle drones is ours and ours alone. We have laid the wide foundations, built it skyward stone by stone. It is ours not to slave in, but to master and to own, while the union makes us strong.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong.
They have taken untold millions that they never toiled to earn, but without our brain and muscle, not a single wheel can turn. We can break their haughty power, gain our freedom when we learn that the union makes us strong.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. In our hands is placed a power greater than their hoarded gold, greater than the miles of armies multiplied 1,000-fold. We can bring to birth a new world from the ashes of the old, for the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong.
Solidarity Forever offers once again a salvation narrative. It's not centered on race, it's centered upon class. It contrasts the workers with the greedy parasite, the idle drone, the hoarders of gold. It promises that working class unity will birth a new world, but not before the old has been reduced to ashes. Solidarity Forever, like the Battle Hymn of the Republic itself, is a good candidate for an alternative national anthem. It is the unofficial anthem of the country's labor movement. To offer a single example, the United Auto Workers sing it at their gatherings and have named both their headquarters and their magazine after it. Like the Battle Hymn and John Brown's Body, the song has links to the abolitionist tradition. The song's author, Ralph Chaplin, was a member of the radical labor union, the Industrial Workers of the World. Founded in 1905, the IWW saw itself as an heir to abolitionism. In the early part of the 20th century, its members spoke of abolishing the wages system and replacing capitalism with something else, something better, something not built upon the exploitation of other human beings. They only thought that this abolition could come about if the bosses and the plutocrats, as they called the titans of industry, were dethroned. John Brown's Body, Solidarity Forever, the Battle Hymn of the Republic, each a different iteration of the abolitionist tradition. Invoking it offers me the opportunity to make a personal confession and suggest how this talk, which has thus far been something of a history lesson, might be reconfigured to fit the advertised sermonic genre. Sermons are conversations between preachers and congregants, their shared tradition and the ultimate unnameable that some call the divine and others name the good earth and our human best. They can have many purposes, but usually the preacher hopes to celebrate some of our shared values and move their listeners to a greater sense of communion and occasionally religious testimony. History lessons are usually not formed with such objectives in mind. The personal confession of this sermon is that I self-identify with the abolitionist tradition. I imagine most of you already know that. I offered a sermon a couple weeks ago titled Abolition Democracy, and I've spoken with you in the past about my long affiliation with the IWW. I believe that some kind of radical transformation around race and class is necessary if the United States and the world is ever going to overcome its historic divisions. I believe that monuments to Confederate generals and advocates of white supremacy should be removed from public squares, and that the country should pay reparations for slavery. This might be a dangerous confession here in Houston, Texas, former city of the Confederacy. And I'm not sure how many other religious communities in the city have self-identified abolitionists in the pulpit. I follow my first confession, though, with a second one. I also self-identify with our liberal religious tradition. Much of the history of Unitarian Universalism, Unitarianism, and Universalism has been trying to mitigate the conflict between different groups. Many of us would like to lessen social tensions rather than see them increase. But more than that, we believe that dialogue and an attempt to find common ground are necessary for a democratic society, and that this is one of our most deeply held religious beliefs, encoded in one of the principles of our association, and that the process of making decisions is just as important as the decisions that are made. The values that are held by others in the United States, these values are held by many others in the United States as well. Scholars call the country a liberal democracy for a reason. The movement of history lesson to sermon that I offer you is to suggest that the work that needs to be done is to figure out how to reconcile these two traditions. History has shown again and again that there will be but endless conflict until the contradictions of today's songs are alleviated. Singing John Brown's Body didn't lead to the end of the structures of white supremacy. Today, more than 150 years after the end of the Civil War, it can still seem a radical statement to say Black Lives Matter. Today, wealth remains largely in the hands of whites. Today, people of color continue to live shorter lives and suffer from more violence at the hands of police than people with white skin. Singing Solidarity Forever has not ended economic exploitation. The great robber barons of old would be jealous of the wealth and power of men like Jeff Bezos. The United States is now more unequal in wealth than at any point in decades. Conflict between working people and the managers and owners of industry will go on until the conflict is resolved. If we want to live in a truly democratic society where political differences are resolved through the liberal value of dialogue, a value that I treasure, then these conflicts will have to be overcome. It is only then that the tensions between abolitionism and religious liberalism might be resolved, and that the country might stop endlessly reliving the same history, the same conflict, that John Brown's body might be finally left to molder in the grave. And now, this 4th of July, I invite you to hear the Battle Hymn of the Republic, a song written by an abolitionist, a song that bespeaks the unfinished work of dismantling white supremacy, for the glory of which the song sings has not come, a song that omits the rights of many, for it makes no mentions of the struggles of the indigenous nations, women, or the LGBT community, a song that celebrates conflict and division, a song that nonetheless hints at what must still be overcome if we are, in the words of the great James Baldwin, to end the racial nightmare and achieve our country and change the history of the world. Amen, and blessed be.
Glory,
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
I end our service with a simple prayer. May these days, difficult as they are, divided as they are, lead to the moment, lead to the time when, after the statues have been torn down and the reparations have been paid, and after each person has what they need, we might finally put the conflicts of the past behind us and behold the glory to be found in each other's eyes and in each other's hearts and in the world around us, of which we are each but a part. Go in peace, go in love. May our lives be a blessing. Amen.
While our church as buildings is closed, our church as people is still meeting, but now online. There are weekly and monthly offerings to keep you connected and engaged with our community. Please join Carol Burris this morning for reflection and sharing via Zoom at 11:30. Creative Writing Group meets today at 2. The group welcomes a full range of artistic expression from the traditional to the experimental. Email alma@firstuuhouston.org if you're interested in learning more about becoming a member of this vibrant and loving faith community. Then join us at the Membership 101 meeting at 6 o'clock on Thursday the 9th. The second Thursday discussion group meets this week at 6:30. The topic is All Hopes Considered. Our world is changing, and for the better, we hope. Come share your hopes for the future and your assessment of our chances of getting there. Please go to our website, firstuuhouston.org/online-group-meetings for more details. And remember, all times shown are Central Daylight Time.